Hey guys, welcome to Module 3 in the 7-Day Startup course. In this module, we're going to be talking about choosing a business name. Now to kick this off and just to get the theme for this module, obviously I think a business name is important or else I wouldn't include it in the book, but I'm dedicating one day to coming up with a business name because that's how important I think it is. I think it is important, but it's potentially a massive distraction. And Jason Cohen says this best when he says, it's more effective to do something valuable than to hope a logo or name will say it for you. So the name is important, but what you're doing is far more important. With that in mind, let's move forward with choosing a name for your business. So again, don't worry too much about it. There's a few things you need to be thinking about. One is that spending time on a name is one of the biggest distractions that entrepreneurs get caught up in. I mean, people just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth about names. And then 2 months down the track, the business doesn't even exist because for whatever reason, the idea didn't work. So, I mean, don't get too distracted with the name. Just think up something simple. I'll give you some criteria at the end of this to think of a name that will work and don't spend more than a day on it. Your business will change. The whole point with the 7-Day Startup is that it's very unlikely for you to just think of an idea, execute the idea, and turn that into a valuable business without any changes. There's a very, very good chance that after a few months of launching your idea that your business is going to change significantly. So keep that in mind. Also, you'll grow into your name. Some names feel a little bit weird at first and you just grow into them. I mean, the word Google is a very weird name, but everyone is just used to that now. It's second nature. So there is definitely something to be said for not worrying too much about a name from the point of view of, okay, maybe it feels a little bit weird, but you will grow into it. Of course, you can always change it too. WP Curve, in fact, didn't start as WP Curve. Google started as Backrub, creepy. And there's so many examples of businesses that have changed their name. It's really not that difficult to do. So if you just come up with something that you can run with now and just don't worry too much because you'll be able to change it down the track anyway. And your customers don't care. Ultimately, the customers care, like Jason Cohen said, about you doing great work. They don't care that much about your name. All right, so where do you start if you have no idea how to come up with a name for your business? So let's just look at a couple of successful businesses that have come up with a name and how they came up with that name, just to kickstart you if you're really not sure where to start. What about thinking about a place? So Apple is an example. It's an apple farm where Steve Jobs used to drop acid on. He ended up naming this company out of it that turned into a multi-billion-dollar company. Crazy story, but that's how it happened. A lot of companies have started just naming it after a place. Adobe, I think it was named after a creek that ran behind the owner's house. This is a really common way to name a business. Combining words is a good way to do it. Group Coupon became Groupon. Really nice, easy word and very successful business. So combining words is a good way to do it. Sometimes it's tricky, sometimes it doesn't work, but that could be one option. Using an acronym, IBM, no one calls it by the full name anymore. Integrated business machines or international business machines, who knows, who cares, it's called IBM. So it's nice and short and you can use an acronym if that works for you. An industry term is a good way to do it. With WP Curve, the letters WPP are common letters to use in a WordPress business. So I gave you a quote before from Jason Cohen. He founded a company called WP Engine and I was aware of WP Engine. I knew of a lot of businesses that were around, that were WordPress businesses that started with the letters WPP. So I was just going to include WP in my name. And that was an easy way to come up with a name. People who see it, who know WordPress, will know that the WP stands for WordPress. There's lots of other examples of industries where you can do the same thing. Use the dictionary. The founders of Twitter liked the word Twitch, so they went to the dictionary, had a look around it, and saw that Twitter was close, and they ran with Twitter. Cool story. Now everyone knows what Twitter is, and they've pretty much invented a word that already existed. Just gave it a new meaning. Extending a word. So when I came up with the name Informly, it was a data application, so it was about information and informing people about their business. And so I put the word inform into an app called Wordoid and looked through all the options, found Informly and thought, oh, that's cool. And then I found inform.ly was a really short, really simple domain that was available. I think I had to pay a couple of grand for it. But that's how I came up with the name. I mean, now in a 7-day startup, I wouldn't go paying a couple of grand for a domain, and that was the example that fired all this up in the first place. But as a name, it worked pretty well. It's nice and short, and that's one way you can come up with a name. You can outsource it as well. CrowdSpring is a site you can use for that. Probably can't get it done super quick on CrowdSpring, but you can do other things. You can ask your friends on social media, ask other entrepreneurs, get a bunch of ideas, put it in a forum, see if anyone comes up with something good. I didn't talk too much about whether other people have taken the name already, but that's a consideration as well. So let's get into the specifics around how to choose a good name. This spreadsheet here is in the resources section, and what this enables you to do is come up with a bunch of names, put them in there, and see how they rank against the criteria. And these are the different criteria I'm going to go through now. So first is it available? And I'm not a lawyer and I can't give you legal advice. I will say that it's always worth looking to see if the .com is available, and it's also worth looking to see if the .com is actually being used by a real company or if it's just a squatter that's got the domain and are not using it. So an example of that would be Informally was one I bought off someone else because they weren't really using it. Content Machine, the name of my second book, I bought contentmachine.com, which was a domain that was someone else had registered, and it was a cool name that I really wanted, and it was for sale. So I negotiated to buy that domain. But if it was being used by a company and that exact name being used for something else, it probably wouldn't have been a good name for me to choose. You can also look at if it's on Twitter, have a look if people are tweeting under that name, and that will give you an example of how active they are. You can also do trademark searches and company name searches, see if people have trademarked the name or if there are other companies using the name. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to tell you when you can and cannot use a name. It's not that uncommon for people to start a business with a name that is used by someone else and deal with it later. I mean, I've seen that done plenty of times. Again, I'm not going to advise you to do that. It's good to check all this stuff, but at the end of the day, you need to launch and decide what name you're going to use when you launch. So simple. This is really key, and it's more and more happening these days that these startups are emerging where the names are so simple because the founders realize that these businesses grow through word of mouth, and your name needs to fall into conversation. So when I tell someone, how you get into the airport, I say I'm getting an Uber. I mean, that is so easy to say. It's just as easy as saying I'm getting a taxi. Not that I'd ever say that because Uber's so much better. So you need to think about that. The simple names work really well. Who are you using for SEO on your website? I'm using South Melbourne Eastside SEO services.com.au/John. That's not going to fly, okay? So you need to think of a brand. You need to think of something really short and something that's going to fall into whatever conversation people are going to have about your product. So Slack's another example I use a little bit because I use Slack and I say the words I use Slack a lot. And I think the founders of Slack realize that when people talk about the software, it's very easy for them to say, I use Slack. So sounds good, short, simple, a good name that people can remember. You like it, it's important. I mean, it's going to grow on you. You're probably going to grow into it, but don't start a business with a name that you don't like because you're going to be saying it a lot. And it has to be sensible for the idea to some extent. I mean, I think the next point is it needs to be broad. So I think it does have to be broad, but it's always really nice when a business name just makes sense for that business. So Dropbox is a good example. Before Dropbox, you were having USB sticks and you were kind of wondering how one file is going to get from one place to another. And Dropbox is just a really nice little metaphor for having a box. You drop it in there, and when you get to the destination, it's synced and it's there in the destination. So you're just dropping a little file into a box, and it's just perfect, really nice and short, that explains what it does. So it makes sense. Sometimes people come up with names that just make no sense, or people associate them with something else, and that's a no-no. And I mentioned being broad. If Twitter had have changed what they do, and in fact Twitter did change what they do, it started out as an SMS service, they don't need to change the name because the word Twitter could mean just about anything. And this is a really, really important thing if you're going to do a 7-day startup because there's a very good chance that what you do is going to change. And if what you do changes and you have to completely reinvent a whole new brand again, then you're back to square one. So choose something broad, short, memorable, something that's available, something you like. And if it can be something that's sort of related to what you do, then that's cool. Like WP Curve is pretty broad. It's sort of talking about the learning curve of WordPress. So, if we had to pivot to do something slightly different like WordPress education or something like that, then it wouldn't have been the end of the world. It sort of covers off both bases. If you can choose something like that, then that's a good thing to do. So I just want to leave you with this one thought that I noticed when I was researching for the book, that every single one of the top 25 brands in the world are 12 characters or less. And that assumes that General Electric now goes by GE, which they generally do because it's a lot easier for people to say than General Electric. So it's something worth thinking about. Like a lot of these brands are actually older brands and they're still short, or they're being shortened. A lot of the startups coming out now are so short, like Slack, Uber, just these really short names that really easily fall into conversation. And it's critical for startups these days to build something brandable, something that people can easily say and easily tell people about. Nice short domain name. So keep it under 12 characters and keep it short, simple, memorable. Ideally choose something that's available and get ready to move on to actually building this business. All right, I hope this module's been useful for you. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next module.